Erwin Rommel had a problem. His lightning drive at Dunkirk had been cut off outside Arras, where 74 British Matildas crashed into his lines. His rearguard was unraveling, his panzers falling back in disarray. In desperation, Rommel wheeled his armor to meet the threat, but the panzers were undergunned. Standard anti-tank shells bounced off the Matilda's thick hide like pebbles. One by one, his tanks were being shredded. The British were advancing relentlessly, just meters from Rommel himself, close enough to end the legend before it began. But right then, Rommel's eyes turned to an unorthodox weapon. Built to rip apart targets 20,000 feet away, aiming them at tanks at point-blank range could save his whole campaign. In 1919, the victors of the Great War tried to strangle Germany's future with pen strokes instead of bullets. The signing of the Treaty of Versailles stripped the Reich of its army, its armor, and its guns. The once proud general staff was dissolved, heavy artillery was forbidden, tanks were outlawed, and submarines were banned. Even aircraft were restricted to civilian use. The Reichswehr, the German army, was capped at 100,000 men, barely enough to police its own borders. The Reich had been declawed. Still, the Germans never stopped dreaming. Behind closed doors, officers and engineers quietly continued to design weapons for a future they'd been denied. What little they could build was pitiful. Stubby 37mm pieces, awkward prototypes, weapons that would have struggled even in the trenches of 1916. So they did the only thing they could. They cheated. After the defeat, German arms companies turned outward. Krupp, the giant of Essen, quietly acquired a third of the shares in the Swedish firm Bofors in 1921. Sweden offered isolation, secrecy, and a loophole. Development abroad was out of reach of Versailles inspectors. By the late 1920s, Krupp knew what the Reichswehr really wanted: a new anti-aircraft gun, powerful enough to shape the next war. During the first year of World War I, the German command discovered that standard field artillery pieces and infantry machine guns were nearly useless, even against slow, vulnerable observation balloons and lumbering early aircraft. As planes grew faster and climbed higher, engineers began crafting weapons built for the sky. Guns with lightning-fast muzzle velocities, firing shells heavy enough to reach stratospheric heights. The new gun was poised to be a weapon years ahead of anything the Allies suspected Germany could build. Engineers envisioned a gun that could fire a 10-kilogram shell at 900 meters per second. It had to rotate a full 360 degrees, elevate from -3 to 85 degrees, and sit on a cruciform carriage with 4 outriggers, arms that extend from the base and dig into the ground. Secrecy was absolute. The Reichswehr compartmentalized every stage of the work so that only a select few engineers and officers were aware of what was being developed. Early prototypes, 75mm guns, looked promising on paper, but fell short in the field. Their barrels burned out under the stress of repeated high-velocity fire, while the massive cruciform mounts made mobility a punishing task. The answer came from the lessons of the last war. In 1917, the Navy had tested an 8.8-centimeter round that struck the perfect balance of shell weight and velocity. That experience now pointed the way forward. The Army set specifications at a minimum caliber of 88mm, allowing larger only if the entire system stayed under 9 tons. German crews trained abroad, in Sweden and its secret proving grounds in Soviet Russia, testing weapons they were forbidden to possess. Prototype 88s began to roll out in 1928. The first production model, the Flak 18, carried a single-piece barrel 56 calibers long, or about 4.9 meters, known as the L-56. This was the weapon Germany had been chasing since their first attempts to strike aircraft from the ground during the early days of World War I. However, instead of a fearsome anti-aircraft gun, Germany ended up with an unwieldy prototype that burned through barrels and shook its own carriage apart. After repeated failures, the Army ordered Krupp to bypass further experiments in 1931 and begin secretly developing a version that could actually fight. Even so, the tests revealed the harsh realities of operating such a massive weapon in the field. Dragging 5-ton weapons across uneven terrain, crews often relied on half-tracks or trucks barely powerful enough to move them. Elevation and traverse mechanisms were rudimentary, and without mechanical sights or automated loading systems, sustained, accurate fire was nearly impossible. Clandestine proving grounds, far from Allied eyes, allowed engineers to push the guns to their limits, while most German soldiers remained unaware of the weapon's full potential. In training exercises, crews could knock down a target at a distance of 2 kilometers, then swing the barrel across the horizon to track another. They fired at kites, balloons, and towed targets across isolated ranges, yet high-flying objects often evaded shells entirely. Every misfire highlighted the gun's primary weaknesses: unstable barrels, uneven recoil management, and the necessity of coordinated, disciplined teamwork. Yet even in early trials, the experiment hinted at hidden potential. Engineers tested the gun against steel plates, concrete emplacements, and other reinforced obstacles to assess its penetration capabilities. The results were striking. The high-velocity 88mm shell punched through materials far thicker than any aircraft or observation balloon it was intended to engage. To harness this raw power, engineers had to refine barrel strength, recoil management, and mounting stability, ensuring the gun could fire without destroying itself. These prototypes proved highly effective and were officially adopted as the 8.8cm Flugabwehrkanone 18, the cornerstone of Germany's emerging rearmament, even before Hitler assumed power. By the fall of 1932, 2 guns and 10 trailers had been delivered. After consolidating power, Adolf Hitler pushed the machinery of the Reich into overdrive. Factories that had once labored under the strict terms imposed by Versailles now roared anew. Hitler openly rejected the treaty, dismissing its restrictions as humiliating and illegitimate. Under his direction, Germany began rebuilding its army, navy, and air force without regard for the treaty's caps, turning once secret experiments into overt production lines. Legally speaking, Germany skirted the treaty through ambiguity. Much of the industrial buildup was disguised as civilian or dual-use production, masking artillery components, vehicle chassis, and heavy machinery as harmless equipment. Meanwhile, the Allies lacked both the political will and the practical means to enforce the Treaty of Versailles strictly, allowing Germany to rebuild its military openly. France and Britain were dealing with domestic economic struggles, political instability, and the rise of new threats elsewhere in Europe. There was also a widespread desire to avoid another conflict so soon after the devastation of World War I. By the time the Nazis were openly remilitarizing in 1935, the 88 had already shed its experimental skin. It evolved from a proof of concept into a polished, stable, and lethal weapon. When the first production Flak 18 rolled out, it towered over the men who operated it and featured a barrel long enough to hurl a shell the size of a man's arm into the stratosphere. The gun's total weight exceeded 5 tons, with carriage and outriggers that could withstand repeated firing without shaking apart. The weapon's elevation went from 0 to 85 degrees, trading the slight depression angle of the prototypes for stability and durability while maintaining overhead reach. Its breech used a vertical sliding block design, allowing crews to fire up to 15 rounds a minute. Ammunition came in 88 by 571mm R shells, each carrying hundreds of grams of explosive, capable of tearing aircraft apart at altitudes over 8,000 meters. Even before it saw combat, the Flak 18 was almost comically overpowered. It required a crew of 6 to 8 men to operate efficiently, each moving in a choreography of loading, aiming, and firing. Load balancing, positioning of outriggers, and crew coordination could mean the difference between a perfect shot and disaster. The hydraulic and geared elevation and traverse systems made it more precise than any other anti-aircraft gun of its era. Luftwaffe units first put the Flak 18 into operational service as an anti-aircraft gun in the early 1930s. Entering limited service around 1933 to 34, it was deployed to defend key military installations and cities within Germany, giving pilots a formidable threat from the ground. Each standard round was a 17-pound shrapnel grenade, capable of climbing nearly 26,000 feet before detonating into a lethal cloud of over 1,000 jagged fragments. Any aircraft passing within 200 yards of the blast risked catastrophic damage. Unlike traditional direct fire tactics, German gunners relied on time bursts at calculated altitudes, allowing shells to explode in the flight path of enemy bombers and release flak. In fact, they were so prevalent on battlefields that the term flak would come to define all ground-based anti-aircraft fire. Upon explosion, these jagged steel fragments could easily and severely injure an Allied bomber crew. Each airborne burst sent a dense black cloud billowing from the exploding shell, becoming a terrifying visual cue for pilots overhead. When a shell struck a plane directly, wings were shredded and fuselages torn open, and even near misses left planes crippled, riddled with holes, or forced to make emergency landings. Central to the weapon's power was the Kommando-Gerät mechanical computer, which calculated elevation, range, and fuse timing with remarkable precision. Using gears, cams, and rotating shafts, it translated input data such as target speed, distance, and shell type into the exact adjustments needed for the gun to hit a moving aircraft. These systems accounted for the distance between individual guns and the aiming crew, canceling offsets so that multiple weapons could be directed at the same target with perfect coordination. A 5-man command team at the post directed multiple batteries in concert, while each gun still required its own trained crew to operate the weapon itself. Later in the war, the gun was further enhanced by Blitzberg radar, which provided real-time tracking data, allowing fire to be adjusted with even greater accuracy. This level of coordination and efficiency would soon be tested under real combat conditions. The Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936. The conflict began when Francisco Franco, commander of the Nationalists, sought to overthrow the Republican government. Seen as a potential ally by Nazi Germany, Franco appealed to Adolf Hitler for military aid. At the time, all nationalist forces were based in Spanish Morocco. Concurrently, the Republicans controlled the Spanish Navy, making it impossible for Franco to safely move his troops to the mainland without foreign assistance. In response, Hitler sent aircraft and personnel that summer, including 6 Henkel HE-51 biplanes and 20 Junkers Ju-52 transport planes. Among the forces drawn to the conflict was an infamous German unit, the Condor Legion. These were young officers, pilots, and engineers who arrived under the banner of volunteers, bringing with them machines and weapons that few outside Germany had ever seen. Franco welcomed their presence. He promised influence and the chance to shape Spain's future, while convincing Germany that its involvement could remain discreet. For the Reich, the opportunity was irresistible. It served as a live testbed for ideas, tactics, and machines. Widespread production had only begun, so the Condor Legion deployed the Flak 18 in small numbers. Even so, it quickly proved to be the best anti-aircraft weapon available. But then came a twist. The Nationalists, backed by German aviators, quickly seized air superiority. Suddenly, there was little call for anti-aircraft fire. What the Nationalists did struggle with, however, was enemy armor. Soviet-supplied T-26 tanks and armored cars rumbled along the dusty roads near Toledo, pressing against thin lines stretched over hills and fractured terrain. For a moment, it seemed the Republican armor might punch through, since commanders knew the infantry alone could not stop them. Forward-deployed Flak 18s were repositioned to meet the threat. The massive cruciform carriages groaned as they were leveled. Outriggers dug into the earth, barrels trained on the advancing tanks. On May 11, 1937, when the first T-26 crossed the crest, the gun layer locked the sight, predicting the speed, angle, and trajectory of the target. The loaders, muscles coiled with tension, rammed the first 88 by 571mm shell into the breach. A deafening blast tore through the morning air, shaking the ground to its core. The first shell struck the lead T-26, ripping through armor that no other field gun could penetrate. Metal twisted, smoke and fire erupted, and the tank lurched violently before toppling sideways in a cloud of dust and flame. The second T-26 hesitated, its crew trying to maneuver around the fallen vehicle, but it was too late. Another shell slammed into its side, splitting threads, puncturing the hull, and ejecting the gunner in a violent spray of sparks and debris. Just like that, the Flak 18 had transformed from the ultimate anti-aircraft gun into a tank killer. Following the success, they were pulled into action across Spain's front lines. Bunkers splintered, armored cars tore open, and earthworks collapsed under its shells. The gun's high muzzle velocity gave it range and accuracy unmatched by anything else in the field. Its effectiveness prompted some German officers, most notably General Ludwig Ritter von Emmensberger, to advocate for adopting the 88 as an anti-tank weapon. When the Wehrmacht crossed into Poland in September 1939, the Flak 18s were present, ready for the skies. Their power remained largely unused. The Luftwaffe swiftly achieved air superiority, sweeping Polish planes from the sky in the opening hours of the invasion. Heavy tanks like the Polish 7TP were few in number, and most units were caught in disarray by the Blitzkrieg's pace. The Flak crews practiced drills, tracking the occasional reconnaissance aircraft and towed targets, but real combat was nearly non-existent. Germany possessed roughly 3,000 Flak 18s, and experience from these early campaigns prompted Hitler to authorize modifications for direct fire anti-tank use. The Flak 18 evolved into the Flak 36, featuring a refined platform, a 3-part barrel, and an armored shield protecting its crew. Soon followed the Flak 37, equipped with improved targeting instruments that allowed the gun to track fast-moving aircraft and armored vehicles with mechanical precision. Mobility, however, remained a limitation. To address this, a small number of guns were mounted on Sonderkraftfahrzeug 7 half-tracks, cutting deployment times to mere minutes. At the same time, another variant, the Bunkernacker, or bunker destroyer, was developed as a towed system on armored vehicles. Both versions optimized elevation from -4 to 15 degrees, sacrificing anti-aircraft capability for more precision on the ground. In May 1940, the Wehrmacht surged through the Low Countries and into France. Standard German anti-tank weapons, such as the 3.7 cm PAK-36 and even the short 7.5 cm of the Panzer IV, struggled badly against the thick armor of the French Char B-1Bs and the British Matilda II. German gunners watched in frustration as shells ricocheted harmlessly, while infantry hugged the ground, powerless to halt the looming steel beasts. The weapon that tipped the balance was the 8.8 cm flak gun. Several hundred were deployed with the Luftwaffe flak regiments. On May 17th, near Montcornet, a battery of the 38th Flak Regiment held defensive positions as French armor advanced. At long range, the 8.8 cm guns tore into the first tanks. One 32-ton Char B-1 received a hit in its rear hull, igniting the engine in a violent internal explosion. Another B-1 was struck in the rear drive sprocket and turret. Its internal ammunition detonated, ending the lives of the entire crew. These projectiles left the barrel at close to 900 meters per second, capable of penetrating 105 millimeters of armor, more than enough to slice through the Char B-1Bs, whose thickest armor measured only 60 millimeters. Witnessing the destruction of their comrades, the lighter 18-ton tank came under fire as well. Though its armor held, the crew abandoned the vehicle entirely. A few days later came the Battle of Arras. The British 1st Tank Brigade advanced with Matildas, again impervious to 3.7 cm guns. Rommel hastily gathered all available artillery, including his division's 88s, and positioned them strategically along the anticipated avenues of advance. The flak gun struck the Matilda's flanks, halting the thrust. Only 4 were destroyed, but the psychological impact was decisive. Across the campaign, flak regiments knocked out bunkers and machine gun nests along the Somme, and even against the Maginot Line in June. By the end, the Flak 88 destroyed 152 tanks and 151 bunkers. Even as the original models proved devastating, the Luftwaffe had already been looking ahead. It pressed for a gun capable of countering newer, higher-flying aircraft. Rheinmetall responded with a radical redesign: a longer barrel, longer cartridge, and a far more powerful weapon. A prototype was ready in early 1941, and the new gun entered service as the 8.8 cm Flak 41. It fired a 9.4 kilogram shell at a blistering speed of 1,000 meters per second, with an effective ceiling of 11,300 meters and a maximum range of 14,700 meters. Its new turntable gave it a lower profile than the earlier Flak models, while improvements to the breech and loading system allowed for 20 to 25 rounds a minute. The result was a weapon that could match much larger guns in range, muzzle velocity, and armor penetration, yet retained mobility and versatility, prompting General der Flakartillerie Otto Wilhelm von Renz to declare it, quote, almost equal to the 128mm. Yet for all its promise, the Flak 41 never replaced its predecessors. The gun was far more complex, challenging to produce in large numbers, and plagued by technical problems. Only a few hundred were ever built, and many of those suffered from reliability issues in the field. In practice, the older Flak 18, 36, and 37 continued to do the bulk of the fighting. By early 1941, the Afrika Korps under Rommel pushed into Libya and Egypt, bringing with them the 8.8-centimeter Flak. Germany had initially treated the African theater as secondary, but Italy's failed 1940 attempt to seize Egypt forced reinforcements. Operation Sonnenblume, which began in February, deployed the 5th Light and 15th Panzer Divisions to Tripoli, supporting faltering Italian units, including the 132nd Armored Division, Ariete, and the 102nd Motorized Division, Trento. The units relied on Panzer IIIs with short 5-centimeter guns, supplemented by a handful of Panzer IVs. Their guns were no match for British armor, but 88s provided a mobile, long-range force multiplier. With temporary Luftwaffe air superiority, these guns could focus on ground targets unchallenged. The open desert magnified the 88's power. With little cover, it struck British armor at ranges that rendered 2-pounders and 25-pounders nearly useless. Camouflaged among dunes or boulders, crews waited as the 8th Army advanced, lured by seemingly retreating German panzers. Results were catastrophic. During Operation Battle Axe, beginning June 15, 1941, German 88s destroyed over 90 British tanks. From November 19th to December 15th, the 3rd Battery at the 33rd Flak Regiment claimed 54 tanks, 6 self-propelled guns, 2 armored cars, at least 3 artillery batteries, 4 anti-tank guns, and roughly 120 trucks, firing just 613 rounds, 11 per tank. Specific engagements included the destruction of 4 Mark IV cruisers near Bir Nebeidad, repelling advances at El Adam, and halting columns near Gumbut. Even when damaged, crews redeployed quickly. At Halfaya Pass, repeated 88 ambushes earned the grim nickname Hellfire Pass, as British tanks and vehicles were methodically cut down. During the 1942 Gazala campaign, the 3rd Battery of the 43rd Flak Regiment demonstrated the same efficiency. 9 British tanks were destroyed after firing 109 rounds on May 27th. Later that day, the unit held a defensive position against 20 attacking tanks, destroying 13 more, as the British often mistook the 88 for a weaker 5-centimeter gun. By the campaign's end, the 88s were indispensable to German mobile armor, combining firepower and psychological terror. Encounters with the new American M3 Pilot Sherman tanks reinforced the gun's fearsome reputation, engaging their 75mm hull guns at ranges approaching 3 kilometers. Even in Tunis, defended by the 2nd Battery of Flak Regiment Hermann Göring, the guns destroyed multiple tanks at point blank and mid-range under heavy fire, sustaining only minimal casualties. The open desert magnified both the advantages and vulnerabilities of the Flak 88. Its size made it a visible target, but this could be mitigated by digging 3-by-6-meter trenches, reinforcing them with sandbags so only the barrel remained exposed. Mobility from the new Sonderkraftfahrzeug 8 tractors allowed for rapid redeployment, enabling Rommel to concentrate fire where it mattered. Coordinated volleys struck, vanished, and reappeared as needed. The Afrika Korps' mastery of the 88 cemented its reputation. Its dual role as an anti-aircraft artillery piece and a long-range anti-tank gun earned it the nickname Teufelskanone, the Devil's Gun. In June 1941, the Wehrmacht surged into the vast Soviet frontier, Panzer spearheads racing across unprepared border defenses for Operation Barbarossa. However, German confidence faltered almost immediately. The Red Army fielded tanks unlike anything seen in the West. The T-34's sloped armor and powerful 76mm gun, and the massive KV-1 and KV-2 heavy tanks shrugged off German 37mm door knockers, and even the short-barreled 50mm and 75mm guns of the Panzer III and IV. German tanks had to be within 200 meters to have any chance of damaging Soviet giants, while Soviet guns could destroy them from over a kilometer away. Panic was avoided only by the intervention of the 88s. Germany deployed them in 51 mixed anti-aircraft battalions, mostly Luftwaffe units attached to the Heer. Their high-velocity shells pierced T-34 armor at hundreds of meters, while the KV-1 could be engaged at ranges exceeding a kilometer. Near Ersaini in late June, a lone KV-2 stalled the German 6th Panzer Division for days until 88s destroyed it. At Dubno, where one of the war's most significant armored clashes erupted, 88s were rushed forward to stop Soviet heavy tanks. Despite their power, 88s lacked armor. Direct hits or nearby detonations could destroy the gun or exterminate the crew. Commanders positioned them in concealed, prepared locations along roads, river crossings, and ridges. As columns of T-34s rumbled forward, the Flak 88s opened fire in coordinated volleys. By 1943, at Kursk, more than 200 heavy 88s were concentrated with Army Group Center, where they were used as both artillery and anti-tank guns. Although Soviet armor had grown stronger, the 88 remained a staple of the German defense, its sharp report dreaded by tank crews across the steppe. Allied commanders had to improvise to survive. In North Africa, British units learned to call down concentrated artillery stonks on suspected gun lines before advancing armor. At El Alamein, RAF fighter bombers strafed and bombed known 88 emplacements, forcing crews to keep guns hidden until the last moment. Tank formations advanced cautiously, spreading across the desert to avoid zones that had swallowed entire squadrons in earlier battles. Elsewhere, deception and suppression became weapons. Dummy tanks drew fire and exposed concealed guns, while smokescreens masked the advance of real armor. Artillery batteries were sometimes brought up for direct fire, hammering pits until crews could no longer serve their weapons. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army adapted. Infantry advanced ahead of armor to probe defenses, while Katyusha barrages and heavy mortars raked suspected anti-tank belts. When concealment failed, smoke shells blinded the guns long enough for T-34s to close. Soviet doctrine increasingly emphasized maneuver, bypassing strong points when possible or crushing them under sheer numbers when necessary. German designers quickly recognized the advantage of mounting such a powerful weapon on armored vehicles, leading to a breakthrough tank built around the 88mm gun. The 88 beat Rheinmetall's 75mm L-70 proposal, but its size required a significantly larger turret, a widened turret ring, and a switch from electric to hydraulic traverse. The gun, designated KWK-36, was essentially a scaled-up version of the 88mm Flak breech and mounting, adapted with a vertical falling wedge breech. Mounted in the Tiger I, it combined high velocity with advanced optics, enabling crews to engage targets at ranges beyond most Allied tank guns during the early war years. When well aimed, a single round could disable medium tanks like Shermans, Cromwells, or T-34s, and heavily armored vehicles could be seriously damaged, especially on the flanks. To manage the massive recoil within the confined turret space, the Tiger was one of the first tanks to mount a muzzle brake, a feature so secret that many early images were censored to avoid revealing it. Paired with its armor and firepower, the Tiger I could dominate defensive positions, control key approaches, and strike enemy armor from distances that left opposing crews exposed and uncertain. By 1943, the 8.8cm Flak had firmly established itself as one of Germany's most versatile and feared weapons, but the war was beginning to unravel for Germany. The same qualities that had made the 88 formidable were becoming liabilities. Maneuvering the massive guns across rough terrain or redeploying them quickly on fast-moving fronts required significant manpower, transport, and fuel, slowing German responses. The growing dominance of Allied air power added another layer of vulnerability. Once thriving under Luftwaffe protection, exposed batteries now faced constant threats from fighters and bombers. Even well-camouflaged positions could be spotted from the air. A single warplane could destroy both gun and crew in a single strike. Meanwhile, German industry struggled under the combined weight of the Eastern Front, Italian campaign, and Allied bombing. Production lines increasingly prioritized newer, lighter, and more flexible anti-tank weapons, such as the PAK-40, PAK-42, and the Panther's high-velocity 75mm KWK-42, which were lighter, easier to produce, and could be deployed more flexibly. The 88 could still engage armor effectively, but maintaining, transporting, and crewing it demanded resources disproportionate to its battlefield utility. By 1944, the 8.8cm Flak had transitioned to a weapon of desperate defense. As the Allies pushed into Germany and the occupied territories, the once feared gun became part of the Reich's last-ditch efforts to slow an unstoppable advance. Urban combat turned the gun inward, targeting not only armor, but also anything impeding the invaders, collapsing buildings, fortified positions, and massed infantry. Logistical strain and relentless air attacks further limited effectiveness. Ammunition was scarce, crews exhausted, and mobility nearly gone. Once Allied units penetrated the heart of Germany in late 1944 and early 45, the Flak 88 had become emblematic of the Reich's desperate last stand. Nearly 20,000 were produced during the war, evolving from a high-flying anti-aircraft gun into one of World War II's most feared and iconic weapons.